All right, everyone. My name is Bovard, and I'm here to talk to you about Upskill Your Org with ML and AI with Kaggle. Just a couple of housekeeping notes first. I will not be taking live questions during the presentation, but we have a TA here, Meg. If you have any questions, you get stuck during the code lab, anything like that, just raise your hand, and she will make her way over to you. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. So, how many folks here are familiar with Kaggle? Raise your hands. All right, so maybe a third of the audience here. And how many have actually participated in a competition before? Any grandmasters or masters or anything? All right, we've got a grandmaster in the crowd. Woo! So, for those of you who have not heard of Kaggle, we'll learn together what that is. But so Kaggle is the largest AI and ML community. We just surpassed 13 million registered users, which is huge. We have our newest release models. We have datasets. We have learn courses. And we have what Kaggle started with, its bread and butter, is competitions. And Kaggle started with the idea that when you apply a competition to a problem, you get a better result. And not only that, but also Kaggle fostered this environment where people are actually working together. So you'll see in the first couple days of a competition, folks are sharing out notebooks. Hey, this is how I did the exploratory data analysis. Oh, here's a couple features I made. Oh, I'm doing this type of model. What kind of model are you using? And folks are very supportive of each other. And if you're new, you can come to a competition, even one that has the prize of $1 million, and say, hey, I'm lost. Can anyone help me? And somebody will. That's a really cool thing. It's a very unique community in this world of the internet. I think you don't see many communities as special as what Kaggle has. And that's why it's a great place to actually bring anyone in your organization that doesn't, maybe they don't know what training a model means, or features, or want to know just more about what's going on in the news. You can use the power of competitions through our community competitions model to run a competition for your team, your whole company, your class, your club, whatever you want to do, and get some really exciting results. So let's start here. So this is a competition that went on a while ago called Mapping Dark Matter. And scientists had a big data set about where the dark matter was and a state-of-the-art algorithm for determining the mapping. And they said, hey, let's run a Kaggle competition with this. And in the first week, the state-of-the-art here was near the top. One team came out and beat the state-of-the-art in the first few days. And that really is the competition loop. You can see at the top, they initially started with an error that was a little bit higher. And then after their second, I'm not sure if it's a second or third or whatever submission, they were actually able to beat the state-of-the-art. And that's the moment when you push that submit button and you get a score that's better than your last score. In the mobile game, if you were doing this, your character would say something like, hey, I'm getting better at this. And that's exactly the feeling that you get. You got a better score, you're at the top of the leaderboard, you're feeling good. What am I going to discover next? Should it be some feature engineering? Am I going to try out a different model? And that's the excitement of a competition, and that's really what gets people hooked, gets people learning, and gets people talking together. And that's really the power of Kaggle. So this specific competition, people have been working for decades on this problem, and a random PhD student in glaciology was able to beat the state-of-the-art in the first week. And not only that, but that team came in. Then in the first week, we are down significantly better. It's trading off between a few different teams. And this entire time, there's a live leaderboard that shows where all the leaders are and what their scores are. And you can see they made tremendous progress on this problem. And along the way, competitors are gaining valuable skills around feature engineering, data cleaning, model selection, and other skills like that. And they're working together, talking about it in the discussion forums, creating new notebooks that show a new technique, and really collaborating and sharing and learning together. So today, we're going to talk about Kaggle competitions. There's quite a few folks who haven't actually seen them, so we're just going to kind of start from first base there. Then you're actually going to be creating your own competition. It's not going to be as painful as it was a few years ago, if anyone's ever tried. In fact, it's probably going to take you about 5 minutes. We're going to explain how you configure that competition correctly, and then we're actually going to participate in the competition together. So here's what you see when you hit the competition page in dark mode. We do have dark mode and light mode, so when you create your Kaggle account, you can actually go to your settings for those folks who prefer dark mode and set it there. You can see there's the overview, the tabs here in the middle. We've got overview, which kind of just talks generally about the competition. The data page, which allows you to download the data set. Code, so Kaggle actually runs notebooks, and you can share your notebooks with other folks or see the notebooks you've created for that specific competition. And then the discussions tab, where folks are talking about the competition, and of course the leaderboard that shows where everyone is in the competition. And then rules, teams, and submissions we'll actually be talking about during the rest of the presentation. So today's goal is to create and launch a competition. And let's go ahead and flip over to the code lab. So I believe the code lab is going to be attached to this session. For those of you who have a laptop, feel free to follow along here. I'm going to skip this first part here of what is Kaggle. So the first thing you need to do, if you haven't already, is to create a Kaggle account. So you'll just go to Kaggle and click register to create a free account. And you actually need to be verified to create a competition. Verification just does a text message verification to your phone. So I'll give you a minute to do that. And while folks are working on that, a couple other things that we are going to talk about today are, one of the things we're going to be leveraging today is a new generative data set. So we enabled competition cloning about 1.5 years ago or 2 years ago. And that enables you to take a competition, click the duplicate button, and then you have a whole new competition, but it's just based on the same data set. So if you wanted to run that for your class, or if you wanted to just do it for your club or for your team, you could do that. But the problem with that is people can just go to the original competition and say, oh, this notebook got first place. I'm going to submit this notebook to this competition. Now with generative data sets, we actually take an AI and we take the data set and create a data set that's very similar. The relationships are the same, but it is a new data set. So some of the techniques will work, but maybe not the exact same rankings for first place. All right, everyone has been able to create their data sets, or sorry, their profile. Let's go ahead and go on to creating your first competition. So as I just talked about, we've got AI-generated competition templates. So when we go to the Kaggle competitions new page, we are going to see an AI-generated competition. That's the one we're going to select today. And we're going to do regression with a crab age. That's the competition we're going to do today. And I will call this Bovard's I/O competition. And you can see that the URL is now set. So I actually have this competition here. If that URL has already been taken, so if you just called your competition test competition, it will yell at you and say you need a unique URL. But I think No one else has done this before. And then this is a demo competition to show the competition creation flow. OK. Then here in the code lab, we talk about the visibility and access. So we have a few options here, public or private. So generally, if you're doing this with your friends and you want to have it just restricted to a group of a class or a club or a team at work, you want to select private. Private competitions are not searchable, and you need a special link to join them. We're going to select private here because I don't want Bovard's I/O competition to show up on the list of competitions we're launching. And who can join? You can select, if you launch a public competition, you can select anyone. Or you can change it to people with the link. So there's a special join link that has a unique identifier. Or you can actually restrict that link to a specific list of emails. So if you really wanted to lock your competition down to these specific 5 people, you could do that. Or you could do a domain, like @mycompany.com. So we're going to say only people with a link. We're going to keep notebooks and models enabled. And we're going to create our competition. And there you go. You've created a competition. I think that took about 2 minutes. So this is significantly faster than it was if you had to grab your own data set, clean it up. And we're actually going to go through some of the things here. But this competition, you see you have 8 of 10 tasks are actually completed. So it's pretty close to ready to go. OK, so we've all created our competitions. Let's go ahead. Now that we've actually created it, probably good to actually understand what we created before we move on to launching it. So the host tab is the most important part of the competition. And over here, you're going to see the tabs that we're going to follow today. So there's basic details, images, hosts, evaluation metric, teams and submission, and then the launch checklist, which we've already seen here. So basic details are kind of the thing we just did in the creation tab. So things like what's the competition name, the description, the URL, the privacy and access. And then there's 2 new spots here. And when we go over to the code lab here, which are the timeline and the scoring and team section. So timeline, you can kind of figure out here, just means when is the competition going to end. So I'm going to say tomorrow. Usually it's going to run for, here it says 2 to 4 months, but no one's going to be joining my competition, I don't think, so we'll leave it for tomorrow. And you can actually release the private leaderboard at a specific date, but we'll talk about that later. Next up, we can go down to scoring and teams. So your competitors will be submitting to the competition. And because there are only a certain number of rows of data, if you allowed someone to submit as many times as possible, they could almost brute force the solutions by just submitting 1 million submissions in one day. And that's not good for a competition. And so we do set a maximum number of submissions per day. So this is set to 5 by default. And then during the competition, instead of rewarding the person who has submitted 1,000 submissions and scoring all of those against the private data set, we make teams select a certain number. So in this case, 2. So out of all your submissions, maybe you're worried about overfitting. So maybe your best solution might not be the one that you're going to select, but you got to pick 2 of them to go on to do the final scoring when we swap to the private test set. And then you can do things like just the number of decimals to display and set the maximum team size. OK, so we didn't have too much to change there. We did change the end date, so I'm going to save changes. Go on to images, which are pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, the image here shows up in the competition, and it will show up in the list of competitions too. So you can see the thumbnail shows up in the competition listing when everyone sees the list of competitions that are going on at Kaggle, and then the header is going to show up actually on the competition page. So those are pretty self-explanatory. The hosts, so if you want to have another host to run the competition with, you can easily add them here. And this searches for usernames, and you can select, I'm going to select D and add him as a host. And all hosts do have the same permission levels, so your hosts can really mess up the competition if they don't really know what they're doing. And they can also launch it. They can delete the data set. So make sure you know who the hosts are. All right. And then evaluation metric is going to be the meat and potatoes of the competition. So when you're running a Kaggle competition, probably the most important part is the data set. But then you also need how you're going to score submissions. So what does that mean exactly? So maybe if we're doing like a binary classification, something happened or it didn't. When folks submit their submissions, are you just counting the number that they got right versus the number they got wrong? Do you subtract the number they got wrong from the number they got right? Do you just give them scores for the one that they got right? There's a whole bunch of different ways to score. And you can see here are a few of them. There are 115 that we currently have. And recently we launched something where you can create your own metric. So if that list doesn't do it for you, you can actually just create a notebook that gets the guesses and the actual results and compute the score and spit it back out. And then you can use that one. So we're using mean absolute error here. And you actually can see the documentation for this. And I can actually view the code if I wanted to see the code of implementation. And then we have the solution file, which of course is extremely important, because when you're uploading your data set and you have your solution file, we want to make sure that no one gets your solution file, because if they do get the solution file, then they can just submit that and get a perfect score. So making sure that is safe. And then we got to figure out the public-private leaderboard split, which sounds a little bit confusing. Why is there a private leaderboard? Why is there a public leaderboard? So when folks are making their submissions, you don't want to run it against the entire data set every single time. What you want to do is hold back some of the data to do the final evaluation with. And that's going to be the private leaderboard data set. In this case, we're doing 80% of the data, or 8,000 rows, will be in the private leaderboard. And only 20% of the data gets on the public leaderboard. And this gives folks an interesting challenge of, OK, how do we make sure we're not overfitting the data, because we only can see 20% of it. And that gets back to they're selecting 2 of their submissions to be scored against this private leaderboard. So to put it in more concrete terms, let's say each of you in the room is right-handed or left-handed, and we can have a couple things about what you do, like maybe what kind of phone you have, or how fast you walk or something. And that's our data set. And then we have if you're left-handed or right-handed. So when you are doing submissions, maybe we're just picking this side of the room, and we test your model against this side of the room. And this side of the room is held back in reserve for judging the final to see who actually comes out on top. And because of this, there are actually some pretty big swings when a competition closes. The person who maybe made it really high up the leaderboard overfit their data really, really hard, and they drop down to the middle of the pack after we release that final leaderboard. And this is very similar to what's going to happen when you're training models in the wild or for your job, is that you don't want to overfit on the data that you have. You want to make sure your solution is generalizable. So that's another really important part of the competition. which again is already done for you when you make a generative competition, which is why they're so great. And then you have a sandbox submission. This is like very important when you're setting up your own competition, that, hey, I can actually make a submission and get it scored and have it kick out the other side. But the other interesting part of this is you can make benchmark submissions. And benchmark submissions just show up on the leaderboard. So maybe you go over a specific solution in class or in your group meeting, and you want to show that on the leaderboard. You can upload it here. You can say that this is a benchmark, and then you'd edit the name to something like shown in meeting. It's not a great name, but we'll go with it. And now shown in meeting is going to show up on the leaderboard. And as folks submit the same code that you went through in the meeting together, hopefully they're coming in around the same score. And then as they prove, they're going to get over that. And that allows you to have, and you can have multiple of these. So you can have, if you meet for multiple weeks, you can have like week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. And it's just a fun way for some competitors to kind of see, oh, okay, so we went through this, I remember when we hit this part. Oh, and I'm finally beating week 4, hooray. Okay. So we got the solution files, the sandbox, and then the other tab that's available to you for a host is called Teams and Submissions. This is a very boring page when no one's in your competition because I have no teams, I have no submissions. But it'll allow you to do things like download all the public-private scores for the teams. If you are a teacher and you're trying to collect your students' email addresses, that's where you can download this as well, so you can mix that with your grades. But we'll skip over this for now. And then we are in the launch checklist. So we already set our deadline. We do need to edit our rules. So as a private competition, for folks that you already know, you don't have to be as concerned about having very strict rules here. I don't think anyone's joining this competition, so I'm going to say, have fun at Google I/O is the only rule for my competition. And then, folks will basically see have fun at Google I/O when they join, and then be bound to the competition rules. So we are ready to launch. Let's check our. So we set our deadline. We edit the rules, and now we're ready to launch. We can schedule our launch to launch on a specific time and date. So let's say you're doing the kickoff meeting for your competition with your class or your team, and you want it to launch 5 minutes before the meeting ends. So you can specify down to the minute when to launch it. Or if you're just ready to go, you can just click launch. And my competition will launch. It will end at 10:11 tomorrow. And here we go. And your competition should now be live. Folks can join it. And let's see, on the basic details page, I made this competition private. So here's my invitation link. So folks will need that to join this competition. So we have created a competition really quickly. We've gone through the configuration for the competition. We have launched the competition. And now let's go through the actual competitor's experience. So over on the code lab here, what we're going to do is we're going to join the competition and then make a submission to that competition. And the formatting on this is a little scuffed, so forgive that, but we'll do that here together. Okay. So, oh no. All right, we're doing side-by-side mode. So we have a competition called Google I/O Demo Competition. that all of you can join right now. If you feel like you know what you're doing, go ahead and you can work ahead and submit. I will check the leaderboard here at the end of the talk, and we'll see who's at the top. But this is running for the next year because this is going out on YouTube. So hi, everyone on YouTube. Feel free to jump in as well and try and see if you can hit the top of the leaderboard. And for those of you who have not submitted to a competition before, we're going to walk through that together now. OK, so first thing is to join the competition. I've already joined this one, but there's a button up here that will say Join Competition. It will show you the rules, and then you have to click Accept the rules, and then you can join. And then we're going to make a submission. So for this, we're actually going to make a new notebook. So we're going to go to the Code tab. We're going to select a new notebook. And I'm going to have to undo this. Hold on. Bear with me 1 second here. So this is going here. OK. So when you create a new notebook, you get just a blank Jupyter notebook. You can actually run things. So I'm just going to run this cell to warm things up here. You can see session is starting. Shows in the bottom left-hand corner. And what actually happens is this is a Python 3 environment with, I think there are something like a few hundred data science-related pip packages are installed here. So everything is ready to go. Obviously, your favorites, pandas, NumPy, any sort of plotting libraries are all there. And you can see that also attached to this notebook is this competition, which is Google I/O demo competition. It has a sample submission, a test, and a train dataset. And when we print out all the files we have access to, you can see here are our files. So the first thing we're going to do is read in the train and test datasets. So we're going to go over here, get this code right here. So we're going to use pandas to read both of those CSVs. We're going to store them in a pandas dataset called train and test. That will just take a minute. You can see when there's a star there, that means the cells hasn't run yet. And then I get a number to show that it has completed. So we have those now in train and test. And now we actually have to use that to train our model. So first, let's take a look at this data. And what was this originally? This was the crab data set. So we have the ID of the crab, the sex, the length, diameter, height, and weight, the shucked weight, the viscera weight, the shell weight, and the age of the crab. And we are trying to predict the age of the crab. So when you pass some data off to the model, you don't want to give it, you do not want to give the model the thing it's trying to predict, because then it will just say, oh, there's a column in the data that matches very well with what I'm trying to predict. In fact, it actually is that. And then the model will say, I'm doing a great job. And you'll say, wow, my model is doing great. And then you'll try and submit it, and it won't work. And I'm actually dropping out an additional column. The sex column is not a number, so it's not going to work well with the model that I've chosen, which is random forest. And there are some pretty easy ways of making this actually into a number, for instance, 0 or 1. But that's left for an exercise for the reader. Oh no, I have an invalid character. So the copy-paste, I think, changed one of the hyphens or apostrophes to a styled apostrophe, perhaps. Oh, and there's one down here too. OK. So this is just saying, let's create a data set called data, which takes the training set and drops out the age and the sex column. And then the answers of what is the age of the crab here is just going to be the original training set, the age column. Okay. Okay, so now we need to import our model. So we're going to be using random forest. There are a lot of models, and there are lots of fun names for models. Random forest is perhaps my favorite name for models because you think of this really cool forest of trees, and that's actually what it is. There's trees that decide, is the crab have a height greater than 30 or does it not? And it'll go down and eventually try and predict the age based on these decision trees. So in a random forest, not only are you taking a decision tree, you're taking a whole forest of decision trees and figuring out the consensus amongst all of your trees. So it's a pretty fun mental model to think through. We've actually just created a new random forest regression. And to train it, this is a very simple model. It requires very little training. And we just call model.fit with our data and the answers. And behind the scenes here, Kaggle has actually spun up a machine to run all my code on, which will actually do my training. And Kaggle actually allows you to train on GPUs and TPUs for free. And so anyone who wants to participate in competition has at least a leg up towards having that free compute, which allows them to train more in-depth models. So my random forest already is done training. I think it finished a while ago. Probably took like 30 seconds. But some models will take hours or even days to train as you get super complex and actually start using TPUs or GPUs to train. And so a really fun part about Kaggle is having access to these tools that you might not have access to. All you really need, you can do this on a phone. You can actually get in there and run the things. And then you're training on really powerful GPUs. It's really cool. Kind of levels the playing field. Okay, so my model has finished training. Next up, we're going to create the submission file. And there's some interesting characters in there. So that's going to be part of the challenge here, is taking out all of the UTF characters that got put in. All right, so age. There's one right there. There's one right here. There's one over here. I think that looks good. So now that the model has been fit to the data set that we had, we're actually going to predict on our other data set here, which is the test data set. And what this will do is it will run the data set through and try and predict the age of each of the crabs and then compare it against what it knows and give you a score. And then we're going to save this to a CSV file. So that ran, or no, did I have it run? There we go. That ran, and then if we check our output, we now have submission.csv. And once we know that our notebook works and it spits out a submission.csv, we can actually just use this to submit to the competition. And I'm actually going to rename my notebook here. We'll call this random forest. Oops. And I'm actually going to save this. And so when I save it, it actually runs the code and gives me a kind of a checkpoint, which I can share with other folks, which we'll do in a minute here. So behind the scenes, this is running somewhere. I am going to submit it at the same time here. And so those will both be running. So this is actually in the Kaggle infrastructure in the back end. We've now got your notebook. we say, oh, they want to run a version of it and submit it. So the version has already finished up. The submission is now going, so I can actually share this notebook. I'll make it public. When I make my notebook public, it's released under the Apache 2.0 license. So that's pretty permissive, and there's a bunch of notebooks out on Kaggle, so it's a really, really great resource. I was talking about how competitors are sharing ideas between each other. By doing this, everything's under Apache. I allow people to comment on here. We'll save it. This is definitely not the world's greatest notebook, so I don't expect too much praise in the comments, but we'll see. And when we go over to the data tab, the code tab of the I/O competition, we refresh the page here. Nope. Oh. Nope. Okay, I'm not quite sure why that's not showing up yet, but it should show up there soon. Right? It's under Google I/O demo competition. Yeah, so, and there we go. I got a score. So my new score is 1.63, and because I'm the host, that's not actually going to show up on the leaderboard. But you can see, remember I did the shown in meeting, and I set that as a benchmark. You can see our benchmark is showing up, and I actually did worse than the benchmark. And the benchmark is probably doing something like guessing the median age for all of the crabs. So you can guess that my notebook did not do that great. Oh, unless the scoring is the other way, in which case I did do better. So go me. All right, so we are nearing the end here. Let's kind of review what we did. We created a competition. We went through all the configuration for the competition, so you understood how all the different pieces worked. We then launched it and walked through the competitor experience. So obviously, I've created my notebook. I did a few things, took some shortcuts, dropped a few columns. Probably is not great for my score. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and fix my notebook and maybe put that text column back in. And I'll see my score improve. And then maybe I'll change from random forest to XGBoost, and I'll train it on a GPU, and I'll see my score improve again. And then maybe I'll say, oh, some of the weights are maybe in pounds, and the lengths are in centimeters, and maybe if I cast everything to metric in the same kind of scale, things would work better, and then my score would improve. And that's the power of competitions and learning, is every time you submit and you see that score improve just a little bit more, you kind of know what you're going to do next. And now you can all go and you can upskill your orgs in ML and AI with Kaggle. Thank you so much for coming. You've been a great audience.